Welcome, everybody. We're going to take a few minutes just to allow all of our attendees to join the room. In the meantime, I will just want to thank Sasha Joseph Neulinger and Joshua Abbey for joining us today as our panelists. And we'll begin in just a few minutes.
Anytime you're ready, Neil.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Neil Popish, and I'm the program director with the Jewish Community Center of Southern Nevada, a division of Jewish Nevada. I want to welcome you to our third virtual Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival webinar. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival, Congregation Ner Tamid, Congregation Pnei Tikva, and Temple Sinai for their support. We are committed to providing our community with quality, thought-provoking films that can be followed by intimate conversations with Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival director and those associated with the films. We will show a trailer to our next film choice and webinar date following today's webinar. If you have any questions for either of our panelists during the webinar, please click the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen and type in your question. All questions will be asked at the end. Again, thank you all for participating in today's webinar, and I'd like to welcome our panelists, Joshua Abbey and Sasha Joseph Neulinger. Joshua Abbey is the director of the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival, the longest running film festival in Nevada. He created the Las Vegas Literary Film Festival when he was the program director at the Summerlin Library, and he was the founder and director of Cinevegas International Film Festival. He has served as chairman of the City of Las Vegas Art Commission and as gubernatorial appointee to the Nevada Arts Council. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in theater from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and a Master of Fine Arts degree in producing from the American Film Institute in Hollywood, California. He has an extensive background in the arts and has produced numerous visual arts, dance, music, and literary theater and film projects in Las Vegas, New York City, Los Angeles, and Switzerland. Joshua has worked as program director for the Las Vegas Jewish Federation and as executive director of Jewish Family Service Agency. Sasha Joseph Neulinger is the co-founder and head of production at Step One Films, where he produces content for commercial clients nationally. He will be making his directorial debut at the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival with his film Rewind. Sasha's interest in film started in early childhood. His father, a filmmaker, often brought his production equipment and passion for filmmaking home with him. Sasha's interest in film led to a self-chosen child acting career. Sasha loved acting because it was fully immersive escape from his traumatic childhood. As he grew older, he became less interested in acting and more interested in directing and filming and the filmmaking process behind the camera. After finishing film school at Montana State University in 2012, he discovered the raw materials that would propel him to the story of his life, an autobiographical film, years in the making. Rewind is set to have its world premiere at the 2019 Tribeca Film Festival. Joshua, take it away.
Hey, hi, welcome everyone. Can everyone see me? Because I only see Neil at this point. Do we have our participants on screen?
We need,
There we go. So that's Sasha, and I'm Joshua. Welcome, Sasha. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Neil, for the introduction. Thank you, JCC. Thank you, Jewish Nevada. Thank you, all the temples and other organizations who are helping to promote and network greater participation in our program, our nascent program that we hope to continue to develop into a really dynamic opportunity for everyone who wants to participate. Today's film Rewind was brought to my attention fairly recently, and I have to say that it made a rather extraordinary impression on me. I felt that this was a film that was going to stand the test of time. And I actually complimented Sasha on that when we first spoke, saying, I feel like you've created something that's, going to be healing and helping people and well beyond your lifespan. And not too many people can attain that type of achievement. So that's pretty extraordinary. And, it comes from the heart, and we're going to talk about that today quite a bit. So I'm going to start us off with a few questions about the film. Everyone participating, I'm assuming, has seen it. And it's a disturbing film, but it's also a very inspiring film. And ultimately, I think it's a film about healing, and that makes it extraordinarily appropriate for the times that we're in right now. And let me just start off. I did send Sasha these talking points. I'm just going to read them. So, Sasha, as a messenger of the proof that good can come from evil, how can we all help manifest that possibility in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, that's a profound question. And while I can't speak to every human being's experience, I can certainly speak to my own and use that as a way to share what I think might be helpful. A lot of my journey that's captured in the film and truly my life has been about reclaiming a sense of self-love, a sense of self-worth, and reclaiming my voice and my narrative, the reclamation of so much that was taken. And what I've learned on that journey is just how much power we hold as individuals through the power of choice. I can't change the past. I can't control what happens around me. I can only choose how I show up in the present moment of my life. And I think when the world throws, when so much trauma and hardship and obstacles are thrown at us in this world that we're living in, whether it's personal trauma, whether it's pandemics, sometimes I think it's easy to fall into a victim mindset of, this is happening to me and there's nothing I can do. And while there's some truth to that, in the sense that there's nothing that you can do about a pandemic, or there's nothing that you can do to change the fact, or there's nothing that I could do to change the fact that I was sexually abused as a kid, recognizing that there's choice despite and following the trauma and the obstacles, I think gives people an opportunity to manifest meaningful and tangible change, and the change that they wish to see in the world. I think it's important to surrender to the fact that we only have so much control, but the one thing that I think always have control over is how we show up next. And that's, I think, really important to remember.
It actually, what you just said reminds me of the serenity prayer, to have, the courage to change the things we can, and to understand, what's beyond our control, and to have faith that our consciousness will show us the right direction. What have been, I'm sure you've had just extraordinary feedback from the numerous people who have been given the opportunity to experience the film. What are some of the impressions that viewers have shared with you that held the most meaning for you personally?
there have been a lot of personal messages from survivors around the world that feel validated. They feel like maybe for the first time in their lives, they can talk about what happened to them with a therapist, that they don't feel that they want to or need to hold that secret anymore. And some of these people that have reached out, are in their 60s or 70s, who've been carrying that painful secret their whole lives. So hearing that is it's very moving for me, because I chose to share my story in the hopes that it would help others, and in doing so, that really seems to be the response. Collectively, just the collective feedback that I'm getting is that it's a hard watch, but it turns out to be a very gratifying, inspirational watch, and an experience that people have said that they won't forget. And in making this film, it's a hard topic. Child sexual abuse, it's really hard to imagine how anyone could choose to sexually abuse a child, and yet every 9 minutes in America, a child is sexually abused. So it's what I consider to be the greatest social epidemic of our time. And the fact that the film is resonating with people, that we made a film that didn't beat around the bush, and hit hard, but also provided or attempted to provide some sort of hope, to know that what I intended is resonating with the general public, is extremely gratifying.
So you were conscious during the process of conceiving the project and through the making of it, that beyond that there was more than a personal catharsis, that it held the potential to actually reach out to others who needed to contend with their trauma as well. The film talks about the behavior being handed down, or there's an implication that it's a multi-generational situation, or it's a mental illness, right? Ultimately. And what are the keys to breaking the chain? And do you believe that's true, that it is handed down generationally?
Well, I believe that trauma is handed down, and I'll explain that. There are certainly mental illnesses that can cause people to hurt others, and there are different studies and discussions about mental illness, and does mental illness come from genetics? Does it come from situation? And the answer is both. It just depends on what we're talking about and what the circumstances are. But I don't believe that someone chooses to inflict that kind of pain on another human being if they're not themselves in extreme pain, or alienated from their true self. So, what compels a human being to abuse a child? And I had a lot of time to think about that as I explored my own story. First, we have to look at what's the difference between myself and my abusers. We know that Larry and Stuart were sexually abused as kids. Larry was sexually abused by Howard, and Stuart was sexually abused by Larry. So what's the difference between those two men and myself? The biggest difference is that I got support, was believed and supported in the healing process and given access to healing, and they weren't. Like, if you want to be cut and dry, that's the biggest difference. So I think that survivors and abusers are trying to achieve the same outcome, which is to reclaim power. But abusers are doing it in a way where they're reclaiming power by having power over someone else. And survivors are trying to reclaim their power from within. So one's extremely destructive and one's very cathartic and potentially healing and inspirational. At the end of the day, if a kid grows up with the belief that they're dirty, disgusting, and unlovable, and that they're so dirty that they deserved what happened to them, and they don't get to tell anyone about what happened to them, they're going to grow up feeling powerless and worthless. And whether or not they repeat the cycle of abuse, it doesn't matter. The negative effect has already occurred. Trauma has been passed down to the next generation. So whether that trauma is acted out in a way that is abusive to others, i.e. the repetition of multi-generational child sexual abuse, or whether it's trouble with intimate, healthy relationships, or drug addiction, or obesity, or self-deprecating thoughts, you name it. When someone doesn't feel like they're a beautiful, self-empowered human being, the choices in life are a lot harder to make. Healthy choices are a lot harder to make. And I really think that in order to stop this cycle, in order to stop this, we can't, this isn't the Minority Report. We can't know what's going to happen before it happens. But what we can do is make sure that we're putting in the energy and the resources to support kids who have been abused and to educate kids who have not yet been abused. So it's education, educating our kids about boundaries, about healthy boundaries, about, if we can teach them stop, drop, and roll, we can certainly teach them a way to come to adults when something's wrong. But also too, if kids have been abused, and it's going to happen, we have to give them all of the support that they need, not only to reclaim their lives personally, but also give them the best access to justice. And that's what I believe.
That was extremely well articulated. Thank you. I'm curious about your relationship with your sister. And in the film, as I recall, there's that moment on the stairs where you acknowledge, or you're aware that she's experiencing the same thing. You don't go too much further into your response to that, as far as whether you felt, if that gave you courage to want to talk at that time, or an impulse to defend her. And then also, once you informed her that you were telling the story and going to share it with the world, what was that conversation like, and how did she come around to, come to terms with that?
Yeah. So, I wouldn't have told my parents what was happening if I hadn't realized that my sister was also being abused, because I didn't know what abuse was before I realized my sister was being hurt. So up until that point, I thought my abusers were hurting me and only me because I was dirty, disgusting, and unlovable. Had done something to deserve it. And when I realized that my sister was, that similar things were being done to my sister, that's when I, for the first time, had an awareness that what my abusers were doing was wrong, because she didn't deserve to be hurt. She was the most beautiful person in my life. And that gave me incredible context. And to add to that point real quick, before I answer the second part of your question, a lot of people ask, how could your dad let his brothers into the home? And in this journey of revisiting my childhood and asking these questions, I was able to learn that my dad's response to the abuse that he endured was the same exact response that I had, which was, oh, this is an anomaly. This is happening to me, and just me, because I'm bad, dirty, and disgusting, and unlovable. My dad was the youngest child and didn't have a younger sibling to protect or to provide context for him. So as he explained it to me, he grew up believing that, okay, this happened to him and only him because of his beliefs about himself. But of course it wouldn't happen to his beautiful children, because they don't deserve that kind of pain. And that's the exact belief that I had until it was broken by the realization that my sister was being abused. And once I realized that she was being abused, I knew that I had to disclose. And as a child, at first I had some frustration towards my sister because I was so young. I was 7 years old, and I now was taking it upon myself to break through 3 different abusers threatening my life if I told. And so that was scary. And the fear that I held was intense, but ultimately the choice to disclose was to protect my sister. And now moving forward to making this film, when I first, at first it wasn't a film. I just had unanswered questions from my childhood. And I called my dad and asked if he still had home videos, because I figured there might be some answers to some of these unanswered questions in the tapes. And after watching the first 6 tapes, what I realized was for every question that I was able to answer, I had 10 new questions that I wanted to ask. So after watching the first 6 tapes, I knew this was going to be a much more intense and long process. And if it turned out to be cathartic, through the questions that I wanted to ask and the answers I might receive, I needed to document it because maybe this could be a resource. And when I explained that kind of vision to my sister, she was actually kind of angry. She was like, "Hey, Sasha, like we just got through all of this. Why do you want to dig it all back up?" And what I said to her was, "Becca, like we survived it, but we didn't get through it. Like there's so many parts to our past that we can't even think about or touch without being triggered and pulled back to a place of pain. And I don't want to live my life that way. Survival wasn't enough for me. I wanted to truly be able to move forward with my life, and I wanted to invite my family on that journey." And after the success with the Kickstarter, and my sister saw thousands of messages from survivors around the globe, she realized that the shame and the stigma that she held about this was something she didn't need to carry anymore. And she found a genuine interest in exploring this healing journey. And because of that, we have this film.
Well, you're both so lucky to have such a beautiful relationship with each other.
Absolutely.
How has your relationship with Judaism changed over time?
It's a really, really great question. Even in the film, we see, our main villain is a very powerful Jewish man. And yet, the greatest source of inspiration for me was a very powerful Jewish man. I don't think that, I don't have anger towards Jewish people or Judaism, just like I don't have blind anger towards humanity. There's good and there's bad. There are people who hurt others and consciously choose to do that, and there are people that choose to lift their brothers and sisters up. And what I've come to learn from my experience, especially with Temple Emmanuel and their response, is the big issue that I have with organized religion is that not all the time, but there are many instances where I think the faith and the institution become enmeshed, so that if the institution has a flaw and it's shown that the institution has a flaw, there can sometimes be a huge defensiveness from the congregation. No, there's no issue with our institution. There couldn't be, because we're Jewish. But there is a difference between the actual religion, Judaism, and the institutions. And we have to recognize that while there are incredible rabbis and incredible cantors that do such a great job of teaching and uplifting, they're human beings. And human beings can have flaws. And there can even be sinister human beings who hide darkness under the cloak of God. And we've seen it in the Catholic Church, and it does exist in Judaism too. I have, throughout my life, I've seen the duality in Jewish institutions. I've met and befriended incredible Jewish people and Jewish leaders. And I've also had extremely disturbing conversations with rabbis who believe that Jewish people don't rape children. And if you make this film, you're going to hurt the Jewish people because it's not true. Or getting, recently I got, it was filtered. One of my assistants told me that I got some hate mail from a 90-year-old Temple Emmanuel supporter who heard about the film, who basically said, "You remembered it wrong," victim shaming. So, and at the same time, my great-grandfather, Joseph, led our Jewish family out of Nazi-occupied Europe and showed what it means to be a person of faith, a person with a really beautiful conscience and an incredibly strong heart and wit. And so it's just important to remember that just because someone's Jewish doesn't mean they're a good person. And just because an institution teaches Judaism doesn't mean the institution is healthy. It's important to remember that there is a difference between the faith and the institution. And so for me personally, I do believe in God, but for me, God, my experience with God is when I'm on the top of the mountain, or when my feet are in the creek, or when I'm watching the sunset. Because for me, I see life in nature and the beautiful design of it in nature without the flaws and ego that exists in humanity, which I think sometimes really bites us.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but I know our participants want to join as well. So I'm going to skip ahead and just ask you my last question, which is, where does the power of healing come from? And how does your experience help heal others?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start by saying that, again, every human being has their own unique journey with healing, and their own unique response to trauma. And so I can't claim to know what will work for everybody, but I can speak to my experience. And I strongly believe that healing starts from within. If our healing is dependent on anything external from ourselves, we've already put ourselves in a victim state. So for example, with the plea deal with Howard, we had gone 4 years back and forth, me being pulled out of school, me being pulled out of social events, losing my adolescence essentially to the threat of our next court date. Motion, delay. And we finally get to the plea bargain. They're asking for a plea bargain. And for so long, it was the thought of Howard behind bars that kept me moving forward. I felt that that's what I needed to be able to move on with my life. But what I realized is, if my ability to move forward with my life is dependent on a jury of 12, or if my ability to move forward in life is Howard behind bars, then I'm relinquishing any power that I have to make the choice to move forward with my life. So by him pleading guilty to 5 child sexual abuse misdemeanors, which, by the way, that's a separate topic. Like, what is a child sexual abuse misdemeanor and why are there 5 that exist? But another conversation. But for the purposes of healing, for him to admit that he abused me, to plead guilty to abusing me, and for me to be able to say my truth to his face, a man who at one point was the scariest person in my life. The choice to move forward was my own. I think the power of healing comes from surrendering to the fact that the pieces that hurt the most may always hurt. And I think a lot of times, at least for me, I tried to compartmentalize the part of me that hurt the most. I tried to compartmentalize little kid Sasha, because if I felt that pain, I felt like I wasn't able to move on. But the truth is, by compartmentalizing a part of myself, I was chained to the past. And so in terms of moving forward and healing, I think it's about recognizing that we can't change the past. We can't change the past, no matter how painful it is. And external outcomes are out of our control. So the true power of healing comes from our own personal journeys to ask the hard questions, to say, if something hurts inside of me, I can't run from it anymore. I need to look at it, and I need to examine it and examine it and look at it and examine it and clean it out until it no longer is something that I can't touch without feeling immense pain. And that self-healing, the choice to confront the trauma head on and to be able to reclaim ownership of your own narrative, is that healing that I think everyone who's experienced trauma deserves.
You know, I can't help feeling that your experience is a profound parallel metaphor to the history of the Jewish people and the centuries of persecution and the incredible determination to persevere and to focus on the strength, the inner strength necessary, to forge new identities and to pass hope and a better world on to the children, l'dor for dor, from generation to generation. And I think in the Jewish context, that makes your story even, more extraordinary. But let's open it up to our participants. Neil, are you with us?
No, I'm not here. Yes, we have quite a few questions. So I'm going to start with some of the questions here. My first question is, this is a question from Heidi, and she would like to know how your sister is doing.
Great question. My sister's doing great. Thank you, Heidi. My sister's doing great. She actually just graduated with her master's in social work. And we did a big family Zoom chat to celebrate. We each had a drink and went around talking about how proud we were of her. She's really an incredible woman. She's incredibly strong. As you could see in the film, it's just the reality. She's got one thing you don't get to see in the film that I get to experience every time I talk to her. She has an incredible sense of humor, and she's incredibly funny. I think that for her, just like me, healing is not a destination, it's a journey. I don't think there's ever an end to healing. I think as you heal something within yourself, it creates space for more self-awareness to learn something else about yourself that could use some attention. And I'm just really proud of her on many levels. Her academic career, the person that she is as a human being, and also her healing journey. So we have an incredible relationship. I love her. And I really wish that I could see her. The hardest part of releasing Rewind to the world during COVID is that we haven't been able to get together and celebrate and have our big hugs, which I'm looking forward to.
As we all. I have a question from Debbie, who actually emailed me a question, and she asked, have any of your abusers reached out to apologize to you?
No, none of, well, so Stuart passed away. I did reach out, well, while we were making the film, I reached out to my Uncle Larry to see if he wanted to talk about his childhood. And initially he agreed to do it, but after talking with his therapist told him it might not be a good idea because it's just a can of worms that he might not want to open. And so, but I never got an apology from him. And then Howard, after pleading guilty, the first thing out of his mouth when he did when he spoke to the press was, "I did nothing wrong." So the Alford plea, which is, he pled guilty to 5 child sexual abuse misdemeanors, not the felony. And an Alford plea basically says, I'm not saying I did it, but if we looked at the evidence, I would definitely be found guilty, which again is a ridiculous thing in the court system. But he'd never had any remorse. And I think to this day, he still denies it. And the fact that I've still, my assistants tell me that I still get some emails from people who supported Howard, members of Temple Emmanuel, who are just trying to victim shame me. So they're still stuck in those ways. And I find it sad. I find it sad that change hasn't happened and that growth hasn't happened seemingly in that community since 2002. I think, it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier, but the truth is I don't need their apologies. Again, that goes back to what I was saying. If I need something external of myself to move forward, then I'm a victim. For me, I actually have empathy for my abusers, especially Howard, actually, because I can't imagine being someone who is in so much pain and has so much repressed rage that they have to violently hurt people the way he did. We know what happened to Stuart. We know what happened to Larry, and at least for both of them, they were able to talk about what had happened to them. The question remains, and maybe he'll take it to his deathbed, is what happened to Howard? Because it's important to remember, and for me, my personal experience of being able to move forward is remembering that before Howard raped me, before Larry raped me, before Stuart raped me, they were all just little kids. And something happened that took them off the course of growing up to be healthy human beings. Doesn't excuse what they did, and they deserved what they got, but I can see little Sasha in all of them. And I'm grateful that I got help, because I can see what was possible for them as a result of not getting help.
Thank you. So Ina had a similar question, and I think you answered it. Did Howard or Larry ever apologize? You answered this question, but Ina also asked, does your dad still have contact with any of them?
My dad doesn't have contact with them. My dad, basically, when he realized my sister and I were being hurt, that was his big realization moment, in the same way that I had my realization moment at the bottom of the stairs with my sister. His realization moment was years and years, like decades after he was abused. But as soon as he came to that realization, he was mortified. He felt guilt. He felt extreme pain, re-traumatization from remembering his own trauma, and guilt about the fact that not dealing with that trauma led to trauma for his children. It was horrible. From the moment we disclosed, his brothers were dead to him. And it's really tough. My dad has done so much personal work and personal growth. And it's important to remember that, even if the camera was a way to create some level of distance in my childhood, it ended up being the one thing that gave me a portal to the most clear healing path I could possibly take. So what was used as a way to distance actually became a tool to bring us closer. And I think that's the beauty of Rewind, and that's the beauty of our family, is that in being able to travel back in time and discuss our past with present day knowledge, we've been able to get to a place where we really understand each other and empathize with each other about that experience. Because when a child is abused, it doesn't just hurt the child, it hurts everybody. And so, yeah, I don't know what Larry's up to. I don't know what Howard's up to. I know Stuart's not alive anymore. And it's really, what they're up to is none of my business. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
I have a question from Eve. She has a few questions, so I'm going to try to put some of them together. I am an early childhood teacher, and I was wondering if you ever wanted to reach out to your teachers. And a follow-up to that would be, teachers should help kids to advocate for themselves. But how do we as teachers encourage children to talk about these issues?
So, first of all, thank you. That's a great question. So it depends what state you're in. I know that Aaron's Law, which I think has been passed in 37 states, is basically state mandated law that says we have to educate children about abuse and how to protect themselves. There's a lot of incredible work that's being done with child advocacy centers. I think the first step is to find out where your closest child advocacy center is. And you can do that on the National Children's Alliance website. They have right on the main site, you can type in your zip code and it'll find you the closest child advocacy center. I'd start there and find resources. Oftentimes they will have resources or even professionals that can come to your school and help educate kids. But in terms of the messaging for our kids and what I think we should be doing, I think it's really important to arm a child with the awareness of what is a threat, what is a boundary, and what do we do when in response to a threat, and what do we do in response to a boundary being broken that we have set. If kids understand that, if kids understand that a threat is inappropriate and that a threat is something used to control, teaching them what a threat is gives them the opportunity to then be able to say it out loud. So if we then are able to arm them with a way to just even openly acknowledge that they've been threatened, just that awareness from the child may deter the abuser. The abuser is trying to groom, and they're trying to pick out someone who they think they can prey on without resistance. So if a child is able to call out a threat, that could stop it right there. But if it doesn't stop it, and the child says, no, stop, I don't like it, and it still happens to them, or if they were feeling really bad, like they didn't like it, then they can know, okay, the second part of this is that a boundary was crossed and disrespected. And when a boundary is crossed and disrespected, what is the protocol? What should the child do? And I think that's what we have to put those protocols in place for how to respond to a threat and what to do if a boundary has been disrespected. And that, because I think, for abusers, they use threats to silence children, and they muddy boundaries. Those are their two primary tools other than brute strength. And so the other piece that I want to mention too, now that we're talking about it, is we can't have nicknames for genitals. If kids see that their parents or caretakers are embarrassed to name their sex organs, then how on God's good earth could a kid talk about those organs being violated, right? A penis is a penis. A vagina is a vagina. And we need to give kids an awareness and a healthy knowledge and respect for their bodies. And that starts with us and how we talk about their bodies.
Thank you. All right, we have a question here from Debbie, as well as somebody else has a very similar question, so I can kind of put them together. Have any of the victims from the temple come forward who were also abused by your uncle?
No other victims have come forward. It's important to remember too that for us, there's a very big difference between pedophilia and multi-generational child sexual abuse. And sometimes they can be intertwined, but pedophilia is actually clinically described as someone who has an inappropriate sexual attraction to children. Okay. And that's, Catholic priests, for example, that have been found guilty, where it's very much a sexually driven thing. Within the family unit, it's a lot more about power. It's about dominance. So there certainly could be other victims out there of Howard's, but I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't, because really, from the stories that I've been told, in terms of like my dad's experience with how Howard abused him, and with my own experiences around being abused by Howard, usually what would spark the flame in him to want to abuse is when he felt like he wasn't getting proper attention, or when he felt threatened. So, you know, one of the big instances for me during Thanksgiving is I wanted the last turkey leg, and everyone said that was okay. He takes me into a room, he pinches me sexually, and tells me that's going to be his turkey leg. End of story. For my dad was a piano player from a very young age, and Howard was the cantor star, or the opera star. And you know, there's a moment from our filming that didn't make it into the film, where my dad talks about, you know, he'd be playing the piano in the basement, and Howard would come downstairs and do things to him, and he stripped my dad's joy of the piano. So it was a display of control and dominance, I think, with Howard, way more than it was about sex. In fact, I don't think it was about sex at all.
Thank you. I have a question from Francesca, and she would like to know how much time passed before your parents divorced, and how did you deal with that? And as well as, how was your relationship with your mom? And she noticed that she wasn't mentioned at the end of the film.
She was mentioned at the end of the film. She is a board member at Mission Kids. We had a card for her there, and so that came, like, you know, that there was a card for her. My relationship with my mom is incredible. She's, you know, she's a lioness. She fought fiercely for us. Even before I was able to disclose, she knew something was wrong, and she was fighting for us. So, you know, today, though, you know, our relationship is, we try, for all of us, I think we try our relationships, we're trying not to have it be based on what we survived together, but rather, okay, we survived this thing, and now let's have beautiful moments that are new and fresh and not kind of rooted in that trauma. And so for my mom and I, we have a lot of intellectual conversations. We share funny memes, but we also, one of the things I really took from my mom was her love of cooking. And so I love to cook, like I absolutely love to cook. And sometimes we'll do a Zoom where we'll both be cooking the same thing in our kitchens. And we're talking about the recipe and, you know, maybe having a glass of wine. And it's a really beautiful thing. I forgot the first part of the question. I kind of jumped to just my mom. Was there another part to that question that I could answer?
The first part of the question was, how much time passed before your parents divorced and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, you know, I don't quite remember how much time passed between disclosure and divorce, but I think it was something like 2 years. I think the divorce was a good thing. You know, both of my parents had repressed trauma, their own repressed trauma when they met, and they both carried that into their relationship. And then, of course, there was, you know, the disclosure of abuse and that whole blow up. So, I mean, you know, I think that the divorce was good for both of them. And I think they would agree. It wasn't really, the divorce wasn't hard for me. Because even as a kid, I saw that they weren't getting along, you know, even before disclosure. And I think both of them having their own spaces, it enabled me and my sister to have our own unique relationships with each parent. And so it's worked out. It's been good.
Great, thank you. I have a question here from Karen, who would like to ask, with hindsight, do you feel that your father could have or should have prevented your uncles and cousin from coming into your home? Tough one.
No, I don't, because he just didn't have a clue, you know? And I know that sounds crazy and foreign, objectively, but think of it this way. He was a child that was sexually abused, and you watched what I went through very vividly, holding that secret, that pain, and you saw I was able to express it with Dr. Lustig. He had none of that. And his explanation to me about how he thought the abuse was only occurring to him because he was dirty, disgusting, and unlovable makes complete sense, because that was my exact ideology about what was happening to me. If I hadn't gotten any help, who knows who I would have been as an adult? We don't know. I either would have been extremely unhappy, or, I mean, God forbid, you know, I'm inflicting pain on others, right? So it's like, it's so critical that kids get help. And the fact that my dad didn't abuse me or my sister, and was a loving father, a very loving father to us. I truly believe that he did the best he can with the best that he could with the knowledge and education that he had, and even better than one might be able to expect from someone who experienced the severity of trauma that he experienced without the kind of help that I received. So that's my feeling on it.
Neil, I'm going to jump in to wrap up the session. Before we go, Sasha, just tell us what's on the horizon beyond COVID, or, you know, during COVID, post-COVID. What's your future look like right now?
Well, you know, my future looks very bright and beautiful. I'll just say that. You know, right before COVID hit, I was, you know, going to be on 34 airplanes in 6 weeks, traveling the country, sharing my message, and all that got postponed. And so for the last few months here, my wife and I have been just on our property. We live out here in Montana, and it's been the first 3 consecutive months I've been able to spend with her since we started dating almost 6 years ago, because of how much I've been traveling for film and for speaking. So this forced break has been an amazing opportunity for me to step back and count my blessings, the personal blessings of being where I am emotionally, the success of the film. And so, you know, I'm working on a book about the process of making this film. I continue to speak publicly. I'm doing a lot of virtual events right now, since I can't be there personally. And if whatever my next film is, it has to be a story that touches me so deeply that I'm willing to make the sacrifices and put in the emotional energy that is required to truly make a film that has the potential to be impactful. And so I don't know what that story is yet. Maybe doc, maybe fictional narrative, but it's got to be a story that compels me to tell it.
Well, please thank your father for exposing you to the art of cinema, the power of cinema, and for your embracing it as a pathway to share your heart and soul with the world, which you've done in a very powerful way. We all thank you for being with us today. Good luck in your journey going forward. We'll remain in touch, and I definitely want to have an option to show your next film at the Jewish Film Festival in the future. So
thank you very much.
Stay in touch.
And I want to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you for taking the time to watch Rewind. And, you know, now that you've seen it, just continue the conversation, because the conversation is the first step. We have to normalize and destigmatize, but the next step is figuring out what we can do every single day to take action and support these kids. So thank you for engaging with us on this topic.
I believe that there is a link to a resource with the PBS site that's in the chat, if anybody wants to access that and copy it. Neil, we'll take it back to you. We're just going to show a preview trailer of the next film that we're going to be having, which I believe is Wednesday, June 17th. Is going to be our webinar, and this is the Mo Berg documentary by Aviva Kempner, who's a very renowned documentary filmmaker who did the Life and Times of Hank Greenspun and the Rosenwald movie and many, many wonderful Jewish context documentaries. And she will be our moderator at that webinar as well. So we encourage everyone to tune in. So thank you again, Sasha. Enjoy nature up in perfect nature. And let's roll that. And I think that's all we need to mention at this point, Neil.
Yeah, I just wanted to, on behalf of the JCC and myself and Jewish Nevada, Sasha, this is our third webinar, and this was just heartbreaking, but also powerful. It's inspirational. You're courageous. It's amazing, and I wanted to say thank you so much for being here with us. I think you blew away everybody with this movie and during this webinar. So thank you, Joshua, again. And like Joshua is correct, we put the link in the chat room. If you haven't seen the film, you can still see it. Just get that link, or you can email me. And Joshua had also mentioned we will be holding our next webinar June 17th at 5 o'clock. The film is called The Spy Behind Home Plate, and we will feature Joshua and Aviva Kempner, who is the producer and director of the film. And we're going to show a trailer now, and just over the next couple of days, make sure you check your email and our JCC Facebook page. We will be providing you with the links so you can watch the next film. So enjoy the trailer to our next film. It's going to be up on your screen in just a moment.
Whenever you're talking about anything with Mo Berg, the first thing you have to understand is it's going to be complicated.
It's a hell of a story.
He loved being a mystery.
Mo Berg was a terrific athlete.
Mo would disappear after games.
He was very charming. The girls would go gaga.
He was a loner who wanted to experience the world and found a way to do it.
Who is this guy who can do all of this?
He was smart and he was funny.
Casey Stengel said he could speak 7 languages and couldn't hit in any of them.
Brain and brawn really does make Mo Berg the ultimate Jewish athlete.
Mo Berg was very aware that peace was going to be disrupted in the world.
The catcher has to have that bird's eye view.
Was he doing intelligence work while he was still in baseball?
He's assessing what's in front of him, where the base runners are, how fast they are, what score is it, what inning is it, who's pitching, what's his stuff, who's up, what can he hit, what can't he hit, how do we win the game.
Here's a guy who went to Princeton, Columbia, spoke many languages, was a professional baseball player. I mean, he wasn't really, you would have had to invent him.
Germany got a big head start on building an atomic bomb.
And it was very obvious that if anybody could ever unlock this great secret, they'd control the world.
The OSS had given the Manhattan Project its own spy, and that was Mo Berg.
It had to be about as dangerous a job as a fellow could undertake. He went behind the lines in a war where a man's life isn't worth 2 cents, you know. I think it takes a great patriot to do something like that.
Mo Berg's father never went to see him play a single game. But Mo Berg said he'd rather be a baseball player than be a Supreme Court justice. What he wound up being is an American hero.
Looks like a good movie.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And if you have any questions, my email is right on the screen. If you would like to, any suggestions for future films or any feedback, please email me. And we will see you on June 17th. Good night and be safe.